Yoel, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you.
So, we hear about a two-state solution, and sometimes we hear about a one-state solution, but there seems to be growing popularity in new types, new alternative solutions that we hear less about, but they are gaining in population. And you have one of those solutions that you've been working on for quite some time. From what I've heard, it seems unique, it seems sophisticated, and quite creative. And I've always said for such a complex conflict, we need a creative solution. So, what is it exactly you're working on, Yoel?
Okay, so I've like you said, I've been working on this for quite some time. Just a little bit about my background. So I was just saying to you privately that I'm originally from New York. You said you're from New Jersey. So growing up in the United States, it was very common or familiar. Everybody knows that, okay, there are 50 states and each state has its own governor and it has its own court system and its own state elections, but there is a federal government as well. And the motto of the country is e pluribus unum, out of many one. So you have this notion of you have the two different flags or different flags for different states. So federalism was a model that growing up in America was completely normal and natural. I've always, as a religious person, I've always had interest in communicating with other religious people, and it seemed that every time that I would meet with someone who was Muslim, that the magic word was Ibrahim. And as soon as you sort of said, okay, we're both either actual children of Abraham, or we are philosophical children of Abraham. All of a sudden, it created a dialogue, an ability to talk with each other. That we're not the same, but we have something in common. Um, and so it all sort of came together, that I developed this paradigm called Abrahamic federalism. That really, in order to approach the situation, you need to address two issues. One is political symbolism, or political. One is political symbolism, and the other is political structure. So the structure is, I think, a model like New York, New Jersey, or and Washington D.C. as a possible model for Jerusalem, an area that is um, belonging to both or to all, as something that we can work with. Also, I've studied other federal models like the European Union, which is more of a confederation. We can talk a little bit about the differences between a federation and a confederation. We looked at Switzerland, Canada, Australia. There are other models where you can have, two different flags, two different governments, but some other body that coordinates between these two bodies. And so I feel that this model of Abrahamic federalism shifts how we think about the situation. And Abraham as a unifying symbol, specifically for the Holy Land, seems to speak very clearly, um, as, as to why the Jews are in the Holy Land in the first place. It's a very simple marker, but it's an ecumenical symbol, that brings us together. And Abraham specifically, his he represents in both Judaism and Islam as the element of hospitality, of kindness, of an open tent, welcoming to everyone. And that's, I think, what we're trying to replicate here. That everyone belongs here, everyone is welcome here. So people will sometimes ask, well, what about Buddhists and Hindus? I'm like, well, they're welcome too. Like, it's not
Everybody's welcome.
everybody's welcome,
Yeah.
and it's not just that the land that arguing, does the land belong to this group, does the land belong to that group. We all belong here, I think, is
Right.
the right way
So it's
of thinking
essentially
about
it's giving people autonomy over their own localized community, but all living under one unified roof, and the unifier being Abraham, which I think is very clever because it is our common ancestor, at least in biblical terms. Um, I'm I'm liking what I hear so far.
it. Yeah, so the model, I wrote a book called Abrahamic Confederation, a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I've recently developed more towards Abrahamic Federation, but it's I think what's appropriate is a hybrid model, something in between federation and confederation. It's just a question of what you call it, But I don't think the name matters so much. In Switzerland is called the Swiss Confederation officially, but it's actually a federation. So I think that you know the idea of having, I think that there should be a council rather than a joint federal government. I think we would maintain a Jewish state of Israel, and there would be alongside it an Arab state of Palestine. I think it's vital that there be equal civil rights, but voting rights would be for two different governments, and that is a way of providing equality to Palestinians while at the same time for Jews maintaining the Jewish state, which is very important for Jewish people and for Israelis. And I think that sort of circles the square and allows us to have a model where I sometimes call it, instead of two states or one state, two states in one state. So there are three terms really. One is autonomy, another is independent, and then the third is sovereign. And I think that there are problems with both autonomy and sovereignty for different reasons. But I think we can work with the term independent. I think there's a desire for each group wants its own level of independence to operate. And I think that what you would have, the Knesset would remain the parliament of the state of Israel, and it would be in West Jerusalem. I propose that if the Palestinians want a seat of government in East Jerusalem, they want a majlis, a parliament of some sort. I don't think that there's a problem, frankly, with the Arab neighborhoods of East Jerusalem. I think the real core difficulty is the old city, and that if we think about the old city, or what they call the Holy Basin, the Mount of Olives, that would have a separate status, maybe like Washington D.C. or like the Vatican, and that would be specifically the location of the Abrahamic Federation Council. I think that's. I've also recently started proposing that the council should have maybe 12 members of each state, representing the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 tribes of Ishmael. I thought that was an interesting number of council members, and that my partners and I, we've discussed this. There's some agreement, disagreement, but I think that instead of having a president or a prime minister, that there would be a chair and a vice chair, and that it would rotate every 6 months. So that the head of state for the state of Israel would remain the president of the state of Israel, and the head of government would be the prime minister. For all intents and purposes, I think things would stay very similar to the way that they are now for Israelis, and but you wouldn't have this situation where it's like one state where there's one, okay, well, who will be the president and who will be the prime minister, like you have in Lebanon, where it's like, okay, you always have to have a Shiite as a president, and a prime minister always has to be a Sunni, and I don't think that that's what we want to do. I think are other ways of organizing this. Um, but I think that for Palestinians, the key issues are civil rights. I think that there needs to be a Bill of Rights for all people in the federation, and I think that they want, from all of my discussions, they want freedom of movement, freedom of employment, and equality. And I think that that I believe that the green line should be erased. I think that this is one country, and maybe two states in one country is also another way of thinking about it. I think that the green line is the 1949 armistice lines. It's just that's where the hostilities ended. But I think that it's one unit, really. But I think that we can deal with the boundaries, sort of like county boundaries or like jurisdiction boundaries, and so that Palestinians would rule over themselves. They would have a state and call it a state. I don't have a problem with that. I think that there will have to be like three different levels of government: local, national, and federal. And I think that the national will be where the different parliaments exist. Federal level will be a council. I think we also need to have a federation police force, so that
Have
that
you
the
already
yeah.
worked out how the balance of power between all these different branches of government would be, or is that still details that need to be worked out?
So we're working out the details. I think that we want to create a model that is broad enough that we don't get caught in the thorns and get stuck on details. We want to have as broad a model as possible, but you also have to say, okay, well, how is this actually going to work? Israelis in general, they want to know, okay, how is this going to work? What's going to happen with the army? Specific, how are you going to deal with citizenship and right of return, and how many seats at the United Nations, things like that. So we have worked those out, um, but I think we want to keep it again at this broad, also Abrahamic Federation model, where okay, we don't have to agree on every last detail. We can work it out, but I think the broader picture is one that um, that I think we want to try to get support. It needs to be both simple and detailed at the same time. So some people want to know the details. How is this actually going to work? But some people they want to have a sense of the broad picture. So I think that there would be two flags, the current flags, and there would be a third flag, sort of like the European Union has its own flag. I think it should be something with a tent, probably. Um, and
A tent, a rainbow,
yeah,
and some falafel balls.
sorry.
A tent, a rainbow, and some falafel balls.
Yeah,
I just threw together some things that that seemed fun, but I didn't put much thought into that one.
I like shawarma better.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but I'm all about supporting the future, which I believe is vegan. So I would support the
Okay.
falafel. Um, so you mentioned right of return. I think this is one of the greatest challenges that people don't know how to approach. So you said you have that worked out.
Yes, so we think that the European Union's model of separating citizenship and residency might be the right way to do this. That, for example, someone who is a French citizen moves to Germany, they can become a resident of Germany, but they remain a French national, a French citizen. They vote in French national elections. So I think you can have a situation where you can, each state can decide who it wants to give citizenship to. So the Israeli law of return allows the state of Israel to say it wants to grant citizenship to any Jew over throughout the world. If Palestinians want to say that they want to give citizenship to Palestinians in the diaspora, I think that that would be okay, because it wouldn't change the balance of power in terms of the demographics, because they wouldn't be voting in the Knesset. In terms of if they wanted to move, let's say if someone from Ramallah wanted to move to Jaffa, they would remain a Palestinian citizen, but they could apply for residency in Israel. But I think that in terms of, we also need to think in terms of for Palestinians, the issue of return. I think we need to take it out of the realm of not fantasy, but just sort of an idea. And how would this actually work? How practically speaking, is there going to be a ministry of absorption? Who's going to pay for it? So I think Israelis, will say, okay, you want to return. You set up your own ministry of absorption, but we're not paying for it. Palestinians, will have to fund it themselves, and they'll have to figure out how are they going to provide employment for Palestinians coming from the diaspora. Is there going to be a competition between Palestinians who are here now and Palestinians who would be coming from abroad, educating the Palestinians who might want to come here. Those are some of the real economic questions that I think when we start talking about, okay, again, like how would this practically work? I think that Palestinians have to decide for themselves, what kind of government, what kind of governing structure do they want, and they have to, and we can work with each other, but I think that this is one of the things that they have to decide for themselves who they want to grant citizenship to. But I think that you could have, but the second level of citizenship is the federation citizenship. So I think, like in the European Union, you could have a federation passport, Abrahamic federation passport, and it would have two versions. One would be an Israeli version, and one would be a Palestinian version. And all citizens of the federation, again, they would have equal civil rights. But the trick is, how do you do this while maintaining a Jewish state demographically? And I think that that federation or confederation is the key that will unlock this particular problem. How do you give rights? How do you allow Palestinians from abroad to come here while still maintaining a Jewish state? I think that providing an independent Palestine, what we don't want is separation. That's the key thing. A separation, we don't believe brings peace. A separation is a divorce. That's what you do when you can't live with each other. We have to figure out how to live with each other. The model that we talk about is that this is, rather than a marriage dispute, that it's an inheritance dispute. It's a family dispute. But the question is, how do we allocate, the property, the Yerusha, the inheritance, in an equitable manner? And I think that's, so Israelis, again, like, they want to know the details. When I speak to Palestinians, they're thrilled with Abraham. They love it. But they don't really know necessarily what federalism is. But they're like, sounds pretty good. And yalla, what are you waiting for? And I think that now, with the deal with the United Arab Emirates, it's going to create an opportunity for economic development in the region, where Palestinians really could be the middleman, the brokers between the Israelis and the Gulf states. I think that we should have one open market. And I think that we should, try to figure out how do we open up to the markets of the Middle East. And I think that that's also something that the Europeans, when they agreed on having one open market, that was what broke down a lot of the barriers between the countries. You still have, again, each state has its own regulations, it has its own laws, it has its own parliament. You have to work out what are the boundaries between the national level and the federal level. I personally think that the federal level needs to be very limited in terms of its power. But there's things like infrastructure and transportation, water, and I think also security to some extent that we can work together on.
Right. Would you say it's fair to say that Israelis care more about the details than Palestinians because we have different concerns, right? Palestinians currently aren't equal, so that's really all they care about. They don't care what the details are as long as they're free and equal. And Israelis, it's more of a demographic and security concern, so that's why those details are very important. How do we maintain some, demographic control and remain secure? It seems like that's probably driving the distinction between how Israelis and how Palestinians react to this.
Yeah, and I also think that Israeli Jews don't realize how significant Ibrahim is in Islam, and that the majority of Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims are traditional. They're religious people. 90% I think start Ramadan fasting. I don't know that 90% make it through the whole month, but they have a very the Quran mentions Ibrahim many times, mentions Moses 136 times. They identify with many of the stories in the Torah, and they see themselves, they see us as the children of Yitzchak, and they see themselves, the Arabs, as the children of Ishmael, and that we're cousins. We know that Hebrew and Arabic were related languages. They're both Semitic. Some people ask, well, why don't you, maybe we should have like a Semitic alliance? So I don't have a particular problem with that, but it doesn't provide the same level of inspiration. I think
No,
it doesn't touch the soul, the heartstrings, the way Abraham does.
I agree completely. I think that the connection to Abraham is far stronger than connection to Semitism. And if you want to do something that will inspire people, you need to touch on areas that are important to them. It's interesting. I interviewed Gershon a few weeks ago, Gershon Baskin, and he being a secular Jew said something similar. He said, we need a way for the peace building process to become a religious process as well. We need religion to be included in the peace building process. And at first I was wondering where that came from, and upon thinking about it, it makes perfect sense because you have probably it's fair to say the majority of the people living on this land are religious, and their connection to religion is stronger and more significant than my connection is to secularism, right? I don't have a deep connection to secularism. I just am secular. So it seems like we need to understand the reality of the demographic and find a way to implement religious tones into our solution in order to inspire and unify people.
So I think that for secular people, there's also this kind of hesitancy. It's like, well, is this how's this going to affect me religiously, or so I think it still maintains freedom of religion, freedom of religious practice. I actually think that, I mean, if you think about the term Israel itself, it also has religious overtones and connotations. Abraham is actually a broader term, but I think it has healing power. And I think that it's been said that if religion is part of the problem, it also needs to be part of the solution. And I think for the Holy Land specifically, it's clear that we need to be dealing with religion in a sensitive but serious way. And I think that that's actually been one of the Um, the flaws of a lot of the peacemaking in the past is that they've always seen religion as an obstacle, something that needs to be rolled over. You know, that the religious people are the people who, you know, are the most, difficult to get to an agreement. I think it's the opposite. I think that religion can open up the heart. Um, as long as there's no coercion, as long as people feel comfortable, people want to feel inspired, and everybody knows that this is a special land. Everybody knows that Jerusalem is, the heart of the Holy Land. How to manage it on a day-to-day basis is tricky, um, but I think that it's as long as there's mutual respect, and I think that's something that this provides. I think that um, for Jews, we see ourselves as descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we see Muslims as monotheists, as they fall under the category of Bnei Noach, the children of Noah, and I think that there's no problem with religiously with non-Jews living in the land of Israel peacefully. The But I think that this situation is even better than the partition situations. There are religious questions. Is it permissible to give away land for peace? So there were those who said that it's permissible for pikuach nefesh, for if it's going to save lives, and then the debate was, well, will this actually save lives or will it endanger lives? I think this model, it doesn't even involve giving up or land. If a Jew wants to go live in Ramallah in this situation, I don't think that, as long as they keep the laws and they're not, vandalizing property, and I don't have a problem with that. And I think that that's also an advantage of this plan. No settlements will be uprooted. Hebron is a part of Israel. The Cave of Machpelah is, some call it the second holiest place in Judaism, where the forefathers and their wives are buried according to tradition. And I think for Palestinians, Jaffa is a part of historic Palestine, and we're all in it together. Um, and Yeah, so I think that religion has healing power. That it can also be a source of conflict, but a lot of it depends on the leadership and the kinds of messages and tones that they set. And I think that a lot of religious leaders are actually, very much believing in coexistence. I think we need a lot more education. Uh, Jews need to learn more about Islam, and Muslims need to learn more about Judaism. But I think we're very similar. We really are cousins. The cultures are similar. The religious cultures are very similar. So yeah.
How would the military function in the
Okay,
Abrahamic
so that
Federation?
would go back to the levels, that there would be local, national, and federal. I think that the IDF should remain the national army of the state of Israel. I think that in terms of policing, I think we need the military occupation aspects to be removed, but we can't have chaos. There needs to be law and order. And I think that a lot of the responsibilities can be shifted to professional Federation police, and that these need to be, instead of 19-year-olds with M16s who are scared. Israelis often don't realize that Palestinians are, for them, security means they're afraid of getting shot. If they look at a soldier the wrong way, or if they're not
Right.
respectful, that their lives are in danger. So I think we need to have like police officers who are over the age of 25. They're fully professional. They're absolutely, bilingual in Hebrew and in English. I would even love it if you have two police officers in a car, one Israeli, one Palestinian, as a way of dealing, certain things like traffic in the West Bank, um, there are many a lot of accidents, a lot of there's kind of chaos when it comes to things like that. I think there's no reason why you can't have Abrahamic Federation traffic police, for example. And I think that but that when you get pulled over, um, that you anytime you get pulled over by law enforcement figure, you're going to be a little worried. But that's, I think, keeping the law and is vital. And so I think we need to be shifting the army level. Army shouldn't be doing policing. But the Palestinians have said that they're not interested in having an army. They would rather spend the money on schools and hospitals. So I think that the IDF would remain as it is. Over time, I think the things could change. If there's peace, there's less of a need for an army. But I think Israelis are still very scared. So they want to maintain the IDF, but I think that the policing aspect should go at the federation level.
And it seems like the military can also be the military of the Abrahamic Federation, and Palestinians could join that, what is currently known as the IDF.
So I think Israelis would have a lot of problems with that. I think they would be very
They would have problems with it now,
hesitant.
though, right? Given a proper peace agreement and reconciliation process, it seems like it's definitely viable.
Right. So it's called the Israel Defense Forces. So I think it's still at this point it's Israeli. I don't think I think that the federation shouldn't have an army. I think that and I think that the state of Israel, for certainly for the foreseeable future, will want to maintain its independent control over the army. And I think that that's personally, I think that that's a way of dealing with it. Palestinians may have a problem with it. I think that this is something that we can debate, and I think that this isn't a deal breaker per se. No, I don't think politics is going to go away. I'm not a, people say, oh, you're utopian. Every time you're a dreamer, you're an idealist. I am a dreamer, but every time I hear that I'm utopian or an idealist, I'm like, that's an insult. Thank you very much. I'm not. I'm actually. I like to call it pragmatic idealism.
Well, dreamers change the
That
world.
I'm
So,
sorry.
dreamers change the world.
So
So,
yeah, you have to be able to see the world in a different way. But I don't. I was a political science major. I don't think that we're going to all of a sudden agree on every last thing. I think that politics and debate over politics and political parties are going to remain. Um, but I think that at least it happens in a political setting rather than in the streets with guns. I think that we have to figure out court systems. That's an important and what level of jurisdiction. I think that we do need some kind of federal court of civil rights, and we have to figure out what would be the composition, who would go on to the court. But I'd rather have, I also think that there would still remain two seats at the United Nations. I don't think the Palestinians are going to give up their seat at the UN. I think you would have Israel and Palestine would get into big fights over, well, who would be the ambassador to the UN. So I think, like France and Germany and England, the United Kingdom still have individual representation at the UN. I think that would happen if there could be a situation where we need to go to, I hope we don't get to a situation where we have to go to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, or but there are bodies, there are ways of dealing with conflict, and I don't think conflict is going to disappear. I don't think politics is going to disappear. I think that we can create an environment where we try to work together, and if we create a structure with checks and balances, and that has fairness, I think that will create a way of trying to avoid getting into problems. But I think that um, I think it's doable. I think it's really doable.
I'm with you on that. I do think that the issue of military, I think it's a pain point here. I could definitely understand the concern. Given our past, our history on this land, and our history before this land, and our need to remain in power and in control, that many Israelis would fear the idea of a Palestinian military, or if Palestinians began to join the IDF. That being said, I think that any area where there's an inequality between both sides is going to create some tension that has potential to boil over, or to even stop a deal from happening. So, humans in general just have an innate need to want what their neighbors have. Uh, right, this is natural. We want what our neighbors have, and there's data to back this up, that one of the most important factors in human well-being is to not have a huge disparity of wealth in a given nation. If everybody's poor, then they're happier than if some are very rich and some are poor. So add that to the already decades of Palestinians being unequal to Israelis, that they already have a lot of trauma and pain caused by inequality, that I think it's going to be very hard to get them to agree to any solution where they don't feel like they have what we have. So, again, I don't have a clear solution, but I am going to bring this up as I think a certain pain point that might need to be given some level of consideration to see how it's resolved. And again, neither of us may have the answer, but it is something that we should think about.
Right, right. I do think it needs to be thought about. I think that the issue of inequality is, well, I mean, I think after World War II, there was a clear element of Germany should be demilitarized. And not every nation, each nation in the European Union still rules over its own army. There's no one European Union military force. And I think a lot of European nations would be opposed to that. I think, so I think that the Palestinians, in terms of whether they have the right to an army, do they want to raise an army? I think Israelis would obviously fear. It's like, well, if you're having an army, then we're not really being peaceful with each other. But I think Israelis, like you said, for our history, I think we need to be able to have the ability to defend ourselves by ourselves. So I think I'm an Israeli, so that's my side of it. I understand Palestinian would have some difficulties with it. I think that the key issue is that military occupation and inequality has to stop. And I think that the other thing in terms of inequality is there is a great disparity between the economic situation in Palestine and the economic situation in Israel. And by default, Israel is like, because our economy is much stronger, we have to figure out how do we deal with, the imbalance of power, and find the economics of the situation, taxes, and all that. That's the nitty gritty where again, like, these are areas where there's going to be disagreement.
All that fun
Um,
stuff.
yeah, yeah, all of those things, and
Right.
budgeting and allocation of funds, and but that's okay. That's okay. Like we had, in Israel, like, okay, we're going to go to new elections, and you're like,
Right.
okay, so because we have to have a budget, so we'll pass a law saying that we don't have to have a budget for another 120 days. So you push it off, and that's either there. A lot of politics is horse trading. It's negotiations. So I think that's and I think those kinds of questions in terms of, okay, well, what does the council have authority over? Who gets to sit on the council? How do they get appointed? Can we have term limits? So I want Israelis to feel comfortable that the state of Israel will continue to function for all intents and purposes as it does. But I want Palestinians to feel like their situation has changed. Palestine, there. I think the other thing that we've been talking about that nobody else is talking about is rooting out corruption in the Palestinian government, and that's they need an independent judicial system. There needs to be internal affairs kind of that nobody is above the law, that people who are in government, that they're accountable. The being in government is not your private slush fund, and it's not just for your maintaining power. You're a servant of the people, and I think that they also need to be guaranteed among themselves freedom of expression, freedom of the press. Um, you know, they the Arab world is not democracy comes from Greece and the West. The Arab world is much more authoritarian. So they're going to have to figure out the balance of, okay, I think that the model should be more along the lines of governance, nafot in Hebrew. I forgot what the specific term in Arabic is, but I think what works in Hebron is going to be different than what works in Ramallah, or Jenin or Nablus. Jerusalem has its own set of issues. But I think that they're not as unified practically as sometimes we think, and I think that they have to, for themselves, figure out how they want to govern themselves.
So you mentioned earlier the need to learn the history and religion of the other, and I agree with you. I think it's a great unifying step, and I think it's part of a greater reconciliation process. Given the amount of pain and trauma that both nations have experienced the past 100 plus years, reconciliation is needed, and I think it's something that's not spoken about enough. Have you considered this? What steps of reconciliation need to be taken, and what that looks like?
Right. So I think that when it comes to the history, we're not going to agree. And I think we have to agree that we're not going to agree. There's going to be recriminations. Well, you started this and you started that. And I think that we need to be thinking more about the present and the future. Um, I think that the history is very painful. I think history is important. I love studying history. Um, but I think I don't want to be shackled by history. I think that you know if we get into the cycle of who started what with whom, we'll never get out of it. That's my personal opinion. Um, but I think that like I'm opposed personally to like the South African or the Rwandan Truth and Reconciliation kinds of processes. I don't think that works here. I don't think that this is a simple, like the Jews in Israel are not like the whites in South Africa. It's a very different situation, and there's a lot of blame to go around. There's a lot of pain. I think there have been tens of thousands of people who've died, hundreds of thousands who've lost their homes. I think that we can recognize. I think the phrase that I've developed is we've each caused each other deep and profound pain. whether we were justified or not, it's not a question I want to get into. Once you get into the question of who was just and who was right and wrong, I think that's a big black hole. But I think we can say we're going forward, that we're I think each side wants to remember its heroes, its martyrs, its this. But I think that we need to be forward looking.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion.
Okay. I'm with you on that, but I don't think we need to necessarily decide who's wrong, who's right, who started it all. I just think we need mutual recognition that we both committed injustices in the past, right? If Palestinians could recognize the Hebron massacre and how horrific that was, if they could recognize terror attacks and how horrible that was for us, and if we could recognize displacement, and live what it's like to live under another nation's military occupation, home demolitions, whatever suffering we've caused the Palestinians. Again, it's not about who's right, who's wrong, because I agree with you. We're never gonna get one side to agree that they're the bad guys and the other side's the good guys. It's not a realistic expectation. But I think we could get both sides to acknowledge their wrongdoings, and that now we're going to move forward towards something, a unified narrative.
Right. So I think that the key is acknowledging that we've caused pain without particularly assigning blame.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's I think we can develop empathy, um, you know, whether it was justified or unjustified. It's not a that's not that's not a conversation that I think is particularly productive. Um, I think the Europeans, they slaughtered each other for centuries, and part of you know in the aftermath of World War II, they simply said we don't want to do this again. Like, we
Right.
can't do this again. We can't drag the rest of the world down with us. So we have to think about the future. It doesn't mean you don't study history, that you don't remember history. Um, but I think that you know each side has its own wounds, and I think it's very very hard. I don't know that it's anybody's place to say they forgive, that they have the right to forgive, or um, taking responsibility. Like, is it really the responsibility of Palestinians? The what the Mufti and that he met with Hitler. I mean, like, I don't think that modern Palestinians are necessarily responsible for that. And I'm not going to indict David Ben Gurion for every one of his decisions, whether it was right or wrong. It's easy to sit from a presentist perspective in the comfort of 2020 and say this should have been done and that should have been done. But we did cause each other a lot of pain. I think that we have to be resolved that we're going to end the cycle. We're not going back to where we were.
Right. What are the next steps forward for the Abrahamic Federation? How do we get some traction? How do we get people on board?
So we have an Amuta, we have an NGO called the Abrahamic Movement. We have done a couple of events. I think we need a lot more publicity. I think we need to. We need to. I've thought about having a congress of some sort, an Abrahamic Congress, Abrahamic Federal Congress, where we work together to build this model going forward. Um, One of the challenges of being a dreamer is that we're not the best at working out practical
Executing.
details. That's where my wife comes in. She's like, okay, it's very, very nice. I'm the one who gets things done in the family. I think we do need to work together. I think building support, building you know, You know, I think that this is. People say that like this is that this could work, and so I'm excited. I feel you know, but we really, I mean, frankly, we need to raise funds, and we need to have you know, a publicity campaign. We need to. Um, I think at this point we're at the point where we need to be thinking about this as a political campaign, and I think we need to work with political leaders. I think we need to get the support of political leaders. I think Ruby Rivlin, the president of the state of Israel, has expressed his support for ideas of this sort. I think maybe if we could get his support, I don't know what's going to happen with Netanyahu, Gantz, Abbas. You know, I think we need to be thinking practically as a political lobby. We need to be a movement that promotes something, but we also need to be talking to political leaders, and we have to be, you know, pressuring them. I think that you know, things. A lot depends in Israel on America and what happens in American elections. So I think that you know, what happens in America if there's a new administration, I think will change things for Israel. Could change things for Israelis. It may, you know, the situation. The Israeli right wing is very happy with, relatively happy with Trump. If a Biden administration comes in, things could change. So maybe, you know, they need to understand that I think that this has the ability to appeal to the right and the left, religious and secular, Arab and Jew. And I think, but it's like, okay, we've got to move. We've got to, you know, that the clock is ticking, and I think we have to neutralize. If Israelis and Palestinians can make peace, we can then tell Hezbollah and the Iranians, get the hell out of here. Like, stop screwing around with our region. And I think that would, and I think the Saudis could play a great role, especially the Abrahamic peace. If we could get, you know, the and the Hashemites and the king of Jordan, all of these people. So you know, I'm thinking big, um, but you know, making those contacts, and you know, I think if we, when we present ourselves as a movement, that there's popular support for it, I think that, you know, that has power. So we need to be building steam and momentum.
Great. Any final thoughts you want to share?
It's doable. Yesh pitaron. The Abrahamic solution, I think, is you know, I think that people ask me, am I optimistic? And I say yes, because I think that there is a way forward. Um, and we, you know, you know, how do we get people on board? How do we you know, how do we build steam? How do we go with this? But I think it's doable.
Amen, brother. I'm with you. Thank you so much for your time, and continue to
Thank
stand
you.
up for something so important.